I'm a female, and this happened when I was in junior high school. My grandfather was a youth probation officer. Therefore, it wasn't unusual to have people he worked with and took care of call at the house with their parents. My grandfather passed away, and a couple of days after his death, a pair of high school boys turned up at the house while I was home alone. I remember one had dyed blonde hair and looked like he thought of himself as a bit of a bad boy. The other one seemed more mature. "Your grandfather took care of us when we were younger, and we're here to pay our respects," the mature one said. I was so impressed that these young guys respected my grandfather that I opened the door and let them in straight away, without thinking about it. Once inside our home, the young men's attitude quickly changed. One was staring at my body and my face. He was eyeing me up. The other boy was looking around our home. He was asking me questions about my family and the house. I showed them to the small Buddhist altar in our family home and the photo of my grandfather. They both lit an incense stick and placed it before the altar. While the sticks were burning, the young men continued to talk to me in an over-familiar way. "You're pretty cute, you know. How old are you? What school do you go to? Have you got a boyfriend?" The boy with dyed blonde hair was asking these questions. I felt very confused. "Are you home alone today?" He was staring at me like a snake. I felt his eyes all over me. I felt dirty. The other boy was eagerly awaiting my reply. I knew I was in danger now. I was alone with these total strangers, and I could tell that they had bad intentions. I think they could see the discomfort on my face. "Oh, I think you are home alone, aren't you? No one else is around, are they?" "Stop it," I said. "What's the problem? It's okay, relax. You're just the type of girl I like," the blonde-haired boy said as he started to approach me. I remember he just started grinning at me. I hated it. The other guy was telling him to stop, but he was ignoring it. Then, I heard the doorbell. It was one of our neighbors. "Hi, it's me from next door," came his voice from behind the door. "Coming!" I shouted as I raced over to the door. I hurriedly opened the door. I was so grateful that the neighbor was here, even though he was here to collect some money. The boys started walking towards the front door. The blonde-haired one tutted at me as he got closer. The other boy shouted at him to get out. When the second boy passed me, I saw an apologetic look on his face flash by as he said, "Sorry," in a small voice. This was a true terrifying event because, at that tender age, I thought the world of violence and what that blonde-haired boy's intentions were only lived behind the television screen. I didn't know how close I was to being scarred for life. Be careful when leaving kids home alone, is all I can say.
This happened one hot summer night a few years ago. I was out with my friend, who we will call S, on a drive. He turned to me as I was driving and asked if I was up for meeting some women. He pulled out his phone and started swiping through Tinder. I agreed since, you know, it's always nice to meet women, and I had just bought a car, so I had that going for me. Plus, I had the app myself, and it was in the height of its popularity, so I jumped at the chance. "You just leave matching the girls to me, man," I said. I was so full of confidence. I had a bit of reputation back then with the ladies. I am not exactly proud of it these days. I started swiping and quickly reached my limit. All the while, my friend was giggling next to me. After about 20 minutes, I got a match, and as soon as I got the match, I got a message. It was amazing. The message was even better. "Hi, what are you up to tonight? Do you want to spend some time with me?" and my friend. I think we could have a great night. What do you say? That sent me and my friend into frenzy. We couldn't believe our luck. I asked my friend what he thought, and he literally ripped the phone out of my hand to reply. So, two stupid men took the bait and courageously drove into the night to meet up with these complete strangers, without knowing what the hell awaited them. We sped to the agreed meeting point, but we couldn't see anyone there. Without sensing any danger, we pulled into a dark car park in the middle of nowhere. We parked up. The meeting spot was a remote train station parking area. There was no one around. Red flags should have been going off, but they weren't. We were blinkered by lust, I suppose. I said to S, "This is pretty weird. They said that they would be waiting here for us." We were so desperate to meet these women that we got out of the car and took a quick scan of the area, searching for them. I said to S that I thought we had been tricked, that it was a hoax. Then I heard someone shout, "Oi!" Me and S kept silent and started back to my car. "Hey you, what are you looking for?" some guy shouted. Two men started power walking towards us. These guys didn't seem like law-abiding citizens at first glance. Before we knew it, they were approaching the car. I looked at S and we didn't need to say a word. We knew these were the guys who set the trap on Tinder for us. Why else were we told to meet in this remote location? We scrambled back into the car as they started jogging towards us. I saw the look in their eyes. They definitely had malicious intentions. I sped out of the parking area and they gave chase in their own car. It was terrifying. The thought of what might happen to us if we were caught. Would we be robbed, beaten, or something worse? I broke some speed limits that night, but eventually we lost them. I was surprised they followed us as long as they did. Maybe they wanted something that we had. Maybe my new car. I didn't want to go anywhere close to where me and S lived, just in case those weird guys were still stalking us from an unseen distance. We just kept driving and agreed to make sure we were about an hour away from our town. We stayed away from our homes until 4 a.m. that night, and then returned completely exhausted and nerve-wracked. Since that day, I have avoided dating apps.
This happened to me a few years ago, when I was 22. At the time I was living in a low-rent, single-person apartment. It was an old building, but it was in a convenient location. I knew right from the start it was not the safest place to live. There was enough to like about the place though. I didn't have to share a bathroom, there was a bus stop nearby, and it was close to my friend's place. There was also a 24-hour supermarket right behind the apartment block, so I didn't really care how old it was. It was big enough for me, and I liked it. Plus, there wasn't much choice at the time in my price range. So the place and the rent were good, but now let's talk about the bad point. The residents. In short, a lot of strange people were living there. They weren't doing anything specific to me, they just made me feel uncomfortable. I was still able to live my life and have fun though. Oh, occasionally bikes would go missing from the car park area, which sucked. On one winter's night, things escalated. I had some friends over for dinner. I was making nabe. We had a big pot on the table, and we all dived in. It was awesome. My friends said their goodbyes as I was clearing away the bowls, and after I heard my front door close, I heard one of my friends utter a small shriek. Of course, I rushed out to see what was wrong. My friends looked agitated. They were whispering and mumbling to each other. When I asked about what had happened, my friend just replied, "Have you had any trouble with anyone peeping?" I forgot to mention that my apartment block was built facing the back of another apartment block, so my front door faced the balcony areas of those apartments. My building and that building were separated by a small parking lot. So my friend said that there was someone staring into my apartment from the opposite apartment in that building. Of course, it's not that common to see someone look into your home with a passing glance, so I was eager to give this person the benefit of the doubt. I thought that my friends were overreacting. Sure, the people were weird around here, but I hadn't had any trouble, so I kind of just brushed these comments off. After a day or two, I forgot about the incident completely. About a week later, when I was coming home from work, I think it was about 10 p.m., I was stood in front of my door, digging around in my handbag for my keys. I casually gazed around and noticed the apartment opposite mine. The curtain was drawn, but it wasn't a thick one. It caught my eye because it was light blue. I looked away, and a second later, my eyes were drawn back to the curtain. There was now a man wearing glasses peering at me. He had pulled the curtain back just a little, so that most of his face was still hidden. He was watching me. He was looking at me for longer than I expected, and for longer than is normal. He was really studying me with his eyes. I caught eyes with him and he just glared at me. I hated it. I grabbed my keys and hurriedly entered my apartment. I called my friend, the one who noticed him from the other night. I asked her in more detail about what she saw. So it turns out pretty much the same thing as what I saw. Some strange guy hiding behind a curtain, undressing her with his eyes. She said that she could only see one of his hands, and that his right shoulder was shaking in a back and forth motion, but I didn't really know what she meant. I was upset, and she was trying to calm me down. I hadn't ever experienced anything like that before. I called my partner at the time, since I was creeped out, and told him about what had happened, and he said, "Oh, that guy! Yeah, when I was in your kitchen, I saw someone outside your kitchen window. That guy wears glasses, right?" I gasped when he said that. I got angry at him and asked him why he didn't say anything at the time. He said that he did, but I just didn't pay attention. That sounded about right. I was on the verge of tears at this point. Because of this creepy guy, I pretty much had my boyfriend at the time move in with me. My boyfriend was an okay guy, but he wasn't the one. I couldn't let him know that, though. I kind of used him. Well, there's no kind of about it, if I'm being honest. He was just a decent enough substitute for a guard dog. Whenever he wasn't there, I would get really scared. I moved out as soon as I got a chance, and so far, I haven't had any issues in my new place, thank God. It was a really creepy thing that happened to me, and it made me realize that women living alone are always close to danger. God, what a bitch.
This happened 2 years ago. I was fairly new to the world of work, and I just started working for a company. Back then, I was working late nights and early mornings. In fact, all of us were, really. Our company had kind of a rota for this, and we had to do one late shift followed by one morning shift every week. I remember leaving the late shift after 11 p.m. on the night in question. I walked through a dimly lit underground car park to get to my car. I got in and started checking my messages on my smartphone. Then, suddenly a thought came to me. I wasn't sure if I had locked up upon leaving work, as I was the last one due to the night shift. This was my responsibility. It couldn't be helped. I summoned up the energy to head back there and check. I got out of my car and headed back to work. Checked, and then headed back to my car. It was locked. I must have been gone for all of about 40 seconds max. I got in and started the engine, and felt a clammy hand cover my mouth. Then I felt a man's hot breath against my ear say, "If you keep your mouth shut, you don't die." I couldn't speak. I was terrified into silence. I just remember waves of panic crashing over me. My head was completely blank. I looked in the rearview mirror and nodded my head. I recognized the man behind me. He worked in the same company as me, but in a completely different department. I was surprised, and against his order I asked aloud, "H, why?" I never really spoke with him before. He was just kind of a quiet guy. He replied, "I've been interested in you since you started working here. If you don't say you're going to be mine, I'll kill you right here." Fearful for my life, I could do little else than to nod in agreement. He then pulled down the lever of my seat, so my seat went flat, and began attempting to drag me into the back seats towards him. I screamed for him to stop. "You said you liked me," he mumbled. He was trying to pull off my clothes. I thrashed at him, and I think somehow in the scuffle, he hit his head against the passenger door. This gave me enough time to get free. I ran back to the building since I had the key, got in there, and locked myself in. I called a male colleague who left shortly after me, and I told him what had happened. I know I should have called the police, but I was in such a panic. Fortunately for me, my colleague was still in the area, and he turned around immediately and headed back to work. With him around, I felt I was safe to unlock the door. We went to the car park and searched for H, but couldn't find him anywhere. It was at this point that I filed a police report. I was absent from work for a while. I decided to use my vacation time. I didn't want to go back there and have to talk to the gossipers. While I was away, H was arrested. With this in mind, I was happy to go back to work, as long as he wasn't there. I thought it was safe. When I came back to work, I was told that women were no longer allowed to be working the night shift alone, and the company offered to help me relocate if I wasn't comfortable working there any longer. My parents wanted me to do this, but I didn't. I liked the job. I didn't want to let that creep make me quit my job. I wanted him to know I wasn't scared. Plus, with him arrested, I didn't think I had anything to worry about. My company informed me on the first day back that he had been dismissed. This was really good to hear. The police were in touch, and they advised me to keep my doors locked and the usual safety precautions. They said that a momentary lapse in concentration almost cost me my life, and they told me to think about that. Take care out there, people.
This isn't a ghost story. In my opinion, it's much worse, and you might agree with me by the end of this story. This happened when I was a graduate student. I was busy writing reports and trying to get on top of my work. I was usually up until the early hours of the morning. The following took place one late night back then. In the dead of night, I heard a woman scream. The sound of the scream came from the street below my bedroom window. I raced to the window and saw a young woman being swarmed by a gang of young men. At the time this happened, I was only wearing a t-shirt and my underwear. I mean, it was the height of summer. I threw on some clothes to get down there and help as fast as I could. Simultaneously, I was keeping an eye on the window. As I was hoisting up my sweats, I noticed the man who lived across the street was already outside, and he was brandishing something which looked like a baseball bat in his hands. I was amazed by his bravery and proud to be living near someone who was so prepared to take care of his neighborhood. I saw from the window the gang of young men run off, and I thought to myself, that dude is a badass. He managed to get some good shots in as well, because I saw one of those men run off clutching his arm. I hoped it was broken. I gave a witness report to the police when they turned up, and by the time I had finished all that, I didn't feel like studying anymore. I just hit the hay. The next day, the police came to visit to provide some information on the attack. It was described as a random act of violence, and we were told to keep our doors and windows locked. A few days go by, and I'm coming to the end of my report when I hear a woman scream outside again. I look out there instantly to see a woman and 2 young men attacking her. Once again, the heroic neighbor bursts out of his house with his bat. The youths and the woman start proceeding down a dark alley just outside of my field of vision. I throw on some clothes and get down there as fast as I can. I heard someone shouting, and then a car sped off. People from the neighborhood had gathered around and were standing around rubbernecking. I couldn't see the gang, the woman, or my neighbor though. I heard from one of the neighbors that the woman had been abducted by the gang. When I heard that, my spine froze. The police arrived on the scene and began interviewing people. Fortunately, one of the neighbors took down the gang's vehicle's license plate number. From the license plate, the police found the criminal's address, and then the criminals. The man who had come out to defend the woman had been abducted and was pronounced missing. The gang used the woman as a decoy to get revenge on them for thwarting them last time. We can only assume that he was abducted by the gang that night. I think about this all the time. If I went down there first to defend her, maybe the same thing would have happened to me. The world can be so evil.
This happened when I was at university. When I started living alone, I used to get newspapers, flyers through the door. But the worst were the cold callers. Some were downright shady. More often than not, I was opening the door to a complete stranger every time the doorbell rang. It got so irritating that I decided to not bother answering the door unless I was expecting someone. I would occasionally check through the peephole if I was near the door, but I never opened it. One day at uni, one of my friends said that they had rang my doorbell to invite me to a party, but I never answered the door. I felt pretty rude, plus I missed out on what sounded like a great party, and I didn't want to seem like an outcast. From then on, I decided that whenever the doorbell rang, I would go over to the peephole and check. I got into this rhythm, and one day I heard someone knocking at the door in kind of a rhythmic pattern, so I assumed it was one of my friends. I didn't check the peephole, I just opened the door. I was greeted by some salesman who prattled on and on about a service he had to clean my mattress and my covers. He purposely stood on the threshold of my door so that I couldn't close it, and no matter how many times I refused his strange services, he wouldn't go away. He offered me a free diagnosis of my bedding, which of course I refused. I didn't even know that was a thing. I really didn't want whatever he was selling, so I just tried to gently close the door on him, while continuously reminding him I wasn't interested in buying whatever he was selling. I had never met someone so hell-bent on a sale. After I closed the door, I looked through the peephole to see if he had gone, but he was still there. His well-meaning salesman's smile had been replaced by a glare. He looked angry. At this point I began to worry. I backed away from my door and it was quiet for a while, until I heard something. A terribly loud noise came from my balcony. A stone clattered against my windows. It was palm size. I could see it there, lying on the floor outside the window. Thankfully, the window didn't shatter. My dorm faced the parking lot, and it was on the second floor. I was too freaked out to go and check who had thrown it, but I had a good idea who it might have been. Since that day, the rings of the doorbell were constant, at least twice a week. They were always followed by that rhythmic knocking on the door. It was really frightening how persistent this guy was. I started to think that he wasn't a salesman, and that he just wanted to get into my apartment. The knocks became more frequent and seemed more and more angry. It was hard to deal with this, living alone as a student, But one day I went to the peephole when the knocking at the door began. I was met with his salesman's eyes. He was trying to look through the peephole from his side. I was surprised by this and let out a little gasp. "Ah, are you home, miss? I know you are. You're just on the other side of the door, aren't you?" he said. I was scared, so I backed away from the door. There was the balcony, though. I didn't want him to come around the front and see me there. Thankfully, the curtain was drawn, and I didn't have the courage to open it. I felt that if I did open it, I'd be seen by the door-to-door salesman out there. I stayed at a friend's dorm for a couple of days, and then I would invite people over to my place when I was home. I was afraid to be alone in there. I think in some companies, salesmen are forced to be this aggressive with selling. They must have a difficult time from their bosses. I would have preferred them to treat people with warmth instead of acting like beggars. It makes me fearful for the vulnerable and elderly living alone. As you can see, I have chosen to believe that this man was just a pushy salesman and nothing more sinister. One thing I do know is that he was resentful when he couldn't get the sale, and for him to behave the way he did was wrong. He was harassing me and made me feel frightened to be alone in my dorm. To me, a human's resentment is much more frightening than any ghost story.
This happened when I was in elementary school, on the day of my eldest sister's piano recital. I had school that day, so I couldn't go and watch her performance, but my mother was going to go and watch it. My mum told me that she would be home at around 7 p.m. I was to get myself home from school and have the dinner Mum had made for me in advance. I didn't mind that idea. I thought that it was going to be fun to have the house to myself. However, that day I had a stomachache at school. I was sent to the nurse, and I had a little rest in the infirmary, but it was determined that I should go home. I told the school nurse that I was going to be home alone for a little while, so I didn't have anyone to come and collect me. She offered to drive me home, and I was very thankful. The school nurse said it would be better to just lie down and get some rest. I went with her to get my pajamas from the closet. We opened the closet, and there was a man there. I screamed, and the nurse and I ran. The man in the closet was someone I had never seen before, a total stranger. He ran for the window and clambered out of it. When we calmed down a little, and we were sure that he was gone, we looked in the closet and found a rope, a knife, and his shoes. The nurse called the police and my mum, and waited with me until they arrived to explain what happened. A few days later, we learned that the man from my closet had been arrested. He lived on our street, about 3 houses away. He was about 40 years old, and described as hikikomori, socially withdrawn. The police told us he had a lot of photos of girls my age in his home, and he had some sort of wiretap listening device. You know, like in the movies where they say that their phone was bugged? Pretty sure our phone was bugged or something. The police said he had some sort of long-range receiver which had the ability to listen in on calls on cordless phones in the neighborhood. This is why we think he picked that day to break into our house. He could have been listening into a phone conversation between my mum and my grandma. He would only have expected to see me, so when he saw the nurse, he ran for it. To this day, even though I'm an adult, I'm still scared of being home alone. I shudder when I think about what a close call I had that day.